Many people believe that music is just entertainment, but today's testimony will show you that there is a spiritual world hidden behind every beat. We're going to hear Letitia's story. She was a successful DJ. She lived at the peak of the party scene until her heart stopped on stage. What she experienced in the minutes she was dead is chilling. She didn't just see darkness, she heard 12 famous songs that we all know, being used in a terrible way, and I'm giving you a warning. When she gets to song number 7, you'll understand why not every path that seems to lead to heaven ends in light. Prepare your heart, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's an urgent warning for your eternity. Here is Letitia's testimony. Have you ever stopped to think about what you're really listening to? I was a DJ, I lived for music and I thought sound was just fun, but I died for a few minutes and what I heard in the place of pain where I went changed my life forever. I listened to 12 famous songs down there, and number 7 showed me that the path to heaven isn't what people sing about. Listen carefully, because your soul might be in danger because of a chorus. You know that moment when you feel like you're on top of the world? That's how I felt. I was up there on stage, the neon lights hitting my face, thousands of people jumping in front of me, and the sound, that bass that you not only hear but feel vibrating inside your chest. I was the DJ, I was in charge of the energy that night, but in a second everything changed. What was a party turned into a nightmare I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Suddenly, there was no more music, no more light. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on the universe. My heart gave a jolt, a sharp pain that felt like a punch, and I passed out. But I didn't wake up in the dark out of nowhere. I woke up falling. People, the feeling of falling with nothing to hold on to is the most desperate thing that exists. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, and the worst part wasn't the darkness, it was what I started hearing as I fell. It wasn't silence, it was a deafening noise, a mixture of screams of agony with a song I knew very well, but it wasn't the music the way you hear it on the radio. It was a rotten, distorted version, as if the sound were melting. I fell into a place that looked like a garbage dump of souls. The ground was hot, a mixture of ash with something that looked like dried blood. The smell, my God, the smell was of burnt flesh and sewage. I looked at my hands and they were trembling. I tried to get up, but the weight of the air was so great that it felt like I was carrying a sack of cement on my back, and that's when the first song really started playing, coming from all directions. It was the beat of Sweet Caroline, that song everyone sings at weddings, at graduation parties, clapping and smiling. But there, in that place, every time the chorus came and the people I saw wandering like zombies clapped, the sound was of bones breaking. I looked at those people and their eyes were empty, filled with an endless sadness. They sang the words, but their mouths were tongue. I realized that the music I loved so much, the music I used to entertain crowds, it was being used to torture those who had lost all hope. I was in shock at how such cheerful music could sound so cursed. I realized that in hell there is no new music. They use what we like up here to laugh in our faces down there. Each musical note felt like a whip on my back. I was a successful DJ, but there I was nothing more than a terrified soul, listening to the soundtrack of my own damnation. I wanted to cover my ears, but the sound went straight into my mind. There was no escape. I was surrounded by a crowd of people who seemed to be in a trance, repeating those verses endlessly, while being pushed by shadows so horrible I couldn't even describe them. At that moment, it hit me, I was dead, and the place I went to had nothing to do with the eternal rest that movies show. It was a horror party, where the music never stopped, but nobody was having fun. I started to cry, a dry cry, because not even tears came out anymore. I could only think about how I ended up here. I was just playing music. I wasn't a bad person, but the sound that followed would show me how wrong I was about what is good and what is evil. The music began to change. The cheerful rhythm from before gave way to something slower, sadder, and I saw a huge iron door approaching. I knew that if I went through that door there would be no turning back, and the sound coming from behind it made me tremble more than any cold I had ever felt in my life. To understand how I ended up in that place, I need to tell you who I was before all this. I lived in Curitiba, a city I loved, and there I was known as DJ Letitia. You know that person who seems to have the perfect life? Well, that was me. I had the best contacts, played at the most expensive clubs, and was invited to the festivals everyone wanted to go to. When I went up to the DJ booth, I felt like a goddess. Seriously, I looked down, saw that mass of people jumping, shouting my name, and I thought, I own this place, I control what they feel. But deep down, way down deep, there was a void that no electronic music beat could fill. I drank, I lived surrounded by people, but when I got home and the music turned off, the silence terrified me, and there was something that bothered me a lot. My mother. My mother is one of those prayerful women, you know. The kind of person whose knees are calloused from talking to God so much. She kept telling me, Letitia, my daughter, be careful what you're feeding yourself. Music isn't just sound, it carries a spirit. You're opening doors you don't know how to close. I thought that was utter nonsense. I laughed in her face. I'd say, Mom, stop with this fanaticism. It's just music, it's just art. People just want to have fun. I didn't understand that music is one of the most powerful languages of the spiritual world. I thought it was a legitimate profession that gave me money and fame. I started getting more and more involved with sounds that had a strange energy. I was looking for beats that would induce a trance, that would make people lose control of themselves. I thought it was amazing to see people going wild on the dance floor, without any sense of time or space. I didn't know it, but I was preparing the ground for what was to come. I started having nightmares. I started feeling presences in my room, but I thought it was just tiredness, overwork. I'd take an energy drink and keep going. The tension in my life started to increase a few months before the festival, where everything happened. I felt heavy, you know when you feel like something is watching you all the time. I felt that. I'd go into the studio to prepare my sets and sometimes I'd hear voices in the middle of the audio tracks I was editing. I'd stop, look around, and there was no one there. I thought I was going crazy, but in reality it was the spiritual world trying to warn me, or maybe the darkness was already reclaiming what they thought was theirs. My mother, with that look that sees into your soul, grabbed me the day before I traveled to this festival and said, "La, I had a dream about you. You were in a very noisy place and couldn't get out. Please, don't go." I was furious. I yelled at her. I told her she wanted to ruin my career with her church neuroses. I left home slamming the door. Little did I know that would be the last time I would see my mother's face before going through the worst moment of my existence. I arrived at the festival with that I'm the best energy. The place was immense. The stage was a giant structure, full of lights and special effects. I was in the main lineup, the prime time of the party. I was nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I felt pressure on the back of my neck, a weight on my shoulders. It felt like I was carrying the world on top of me. While I waited for my turn to go on, I looked at the other DJs and everything seemed strange. The lights seemed more aggressive, the colors seemed wrong. You know when something looks beautiful, that gives you the chills? That was it. I started preparing my equipment, my hands sweating cold. I put on my headphones and the sound coming from there was a strange noise, like thousands of people were whispering at the same time. I shook my head, thinking it was technical interference. When I finally got on stage and dropped the first beat, the crowd went crazy, but to me the sound was coming out differently. I looked at the dance floor and didn't see happy people anymore. I saw shadows, I saw faces that transformed for a second and then returned to normal. Fear began to rise in my throat. I tried to concentrate on the mix, but my heart started to skip a beat. Literally, I felt that every time the bass hit the speakers, my heart tried to keep up and didn't. I couldn't. It was as if the music was sucking the life out of me. I was there surrounded by thousands of people at the peak of what I thought was success, but I had never felt so alone and so in danger. I looked to the side, to my assistant, and tried to say that I wasn't okay. But my voice wouldn't come out. It was at that moment that I heard a laugh over the music. It wasn't a human laugh, it was something dark, something that came from within the sound, and the last thing I saw before falling on top of the controller was the stage clock stopping. Time stopped for me there. The neon glow went out and darkness swallowed me all at once. I didn't know that this was the beginning of my descent to the place where music is used for eternal torment. I remember the sound of my face hitting the controller, you know that sound of plastic hitting metal? That was the last physical thing I felt. For a second, the sound of the party was muffled, as if I were underwater. I tried to breathe, but it was as if the air had turned to lead. I wanted to ask for help, I wanted to scream for security, but my lungs wouldn't obey. I was lying there on top of the equipment I loved so much, and what I saw was panic starting to spread. The people in front of the stage didn't understand at first. They thought it was part of the show, that I was doing some kind of dramatic performance. They kept jumping, laughing, with those drinks in their hands. But then the sound stopped completely. There was that sharp, ear-piercing feedback noise, and I felt a chill that started at the tips of my toes and went up to my neck. It wasn't the cold of an air conditioner, it was the cold of death. It was as if every drop of blood in my body was turning to ice. Suddenly, I no longer felt the weight of my body. It was the strangest sensation of my life. I was floating. I looked down and saw a woman lying on the records with messy blonde hair and skin turning gray. It took me a few seconds to understand that it was me. I was watching my own death from above. I saw the security guards jumping the fence. I saw my assistant, Bito, with his hands on his head, desperately screaming for a doctor. I tried to say, "Hey, I'm here, I'm okay," but nobody heard me. I reached out to touch Bito's shoulder, but my hand passed right through him, as if I were made of smoke. That's when the real despair began. I wasn't in a place of light. I didn't see any tunnel. I didn't see deceased relatives coming to get me. What I saw was the festival environment changing color. Everything went dark, but a dirty, heavy darkness. I saw black figures emerging from the crowd. They were tall, faceless shadows walking among the young people who were still in shock. These shadows didn't seem to be there to help. They were laughing. I could hear the sound of their laughter. It was like metal dragging on concrete. They pointed at my body and then looked up, to where I was floating. They knew I was there. At that moment, the paramedics arrived. I saw them opening the door. They were pulling my shirt open, putting those shock devices on my chest. I heard the doctor yell, "Get away! Go!" My body jerked, my back arched, but I didn't feel the shock. I only felt a downward pull. You know when you're in an elevator and it goes down too fast and you feel that cold feeling in your stomach? It was like that, only 1,000 times stronger. I started screaming for God. For the first time in years I remembered that He existed. I kept saying, "God, help me, bring me back. I don't want to die now. I have so much to do." But the sky seemed like bronze. No answer came. I looked up and only saw the dark ceiling of the pavilion. But now it seemed miles away, and the black figures began to approach me, floating in the air. One of them, the tallest, came very close to my face. The smell coming from it was unbearable. It smelled like a dead animal that had been dead for many days. It had no eyes, but I felt it staring at me with a hatred I had never seen in any human being. It whispered in my ear, and its voice was as if several people were speaking at the same time. "You played for us your whole life, now you're going to hear our playlist." I felt a terror that froze my soul. I understood that the parties I threw, the lifestyle I led, all of that had connected me to those things. I thought I was in control of the situation, but I was just a piece in their game. I saw the doctors giving up. I saw them. They looked at the clock and noted the time of my death. I wanted to cry. I wanted to hug my mother and ask for forgiveness for being so arrogant, for thinking I knew everything. That's when the pavilion floor seemed to open up. It wasn't a physical hole. It was as if reality was tearing apart. I began to be sucked into that black hole. I tried to hold on to the stage beams, the speakers, but my hands wouldn't grip anything. I was pulled with violent force downwards, away from the lights, away from life, away from any chance of turning back. As I fell, the noise of the festival was replaced by the sound of howling wind, but it wasn't storm wind. It was lamentations, voices crying for help, and in the midst of this chaos, A melody began to play very softly, but it grew louder. It was the introduction to a famous song, but the rhythm was dragging, heavy, as if it were being played on an old, broken record player. There I understood that my journey into the dark was only beginning. The fall seemed to have no end. Finally, but suddenly my body stopped. I didn't hit anything solid. It was as if the air had become so dense that it held me, but not in a gentle way. It was as if I were buried alive in quicksand, only in the middle of nowhere. When I finally managed to open my eyes, I wished I had never done it. What I saw wasn't nothingness, it was an immense place. A valley that seemed endless, but it wasn't open sky. The sky there was like the ceiling of an infinite cave, but made of a purple and grey smoke that moved all the time, as if it were alive and suffering. The ground was horrible. It looked like a mixture of rust, hot ashes, and something sticky that I'd rather not imagine what it was. With each step I tried to take, my feet sank in a heat rose that burned the soles of my boots, pierced the leather, and fried my skin. But what truly paralyzed me was the sound. As a DJ, I've spent my life studying frequencies, rhythms, and how sound propagates. There, the laws from physics didn't exist. The sound came from inside the earth, from the middle of the smoke, from inside my own head, and it was a noise of millions of voices crying, but at a constant rhythm. That's when I heard the song on track 12 of that cursed playlist. It started with that brass arrangement that everyone knows. You know, that song that plays in stadiums, at family parties, that everyone sings along to while laughing. Sweet Caroline. My brain immediately froze. I thought, it can't be, I'm in hell and New Diamond is playing. But as the music got louder, I realized the cruelty of that place. The music wasn't joyful there, it was used as a form of mockery. I saw a crowd of people, thousands of them walking in circles. They looked like melting wax figures. And when it got to the chorus, where everyone usually claps, pa pa pa, the sound wasn't of clapping hands. Every time the rhythm called for clapping, dark figures, which looked like gods made of shadow, struck those people on the backs with heavy chains. The sound of the metal cutting through the dry flesh of those souls perfectly matched the rhythm of the clapping, pa pa pa, and people were forced to shout Caroline's name, but their cries were of an agony I can't even describe. It was a song about happiness, being used to grind what was left of those souls. I hid behind a rock that looked like a giant tooth sticking out of the ground. I was trembling, hugging my legs, trying to cover my ears. I thought, this is a bad joke. God, why this music? And that's when a voice as dry as old parchment whispered near me, it seems light, doesn't it? It seems innocent, but how many times have you used this joy to distract people from the truth? Not everything that makes you smile comes from the light, Letitia. I looked to the side and saw a man sitting on the ground. He wore clothes that seemed to have been elegant once, but now they were burnt rags. He had no eyelids, so his eyes were always open, dry, red. He explained to me that the song was played to remind people that they had chosen fleeting pleasures, empty parties, and plastic happiness, while ignoring eternity. I began to understand what was happening in the world. We think things are neutral, we think it's just a song. But there I saw that the enemy uses beauty, rhythm, and nostalgia to create a smoke screen. The people there sang the song while crying, because that melody brought back memories of when they were alive and had the chance to choose God, but they preferred to keep clapping for the world. The atmosphere in that place was one of heavy despair. It's not like the sadness you feel here that you take medicine for or sleep over and it goes away. It's a despair that you feel will never, in billions of years, end. And the music on channel 12 kept repeating like a scratched record, hammering into the heads of those people that what seems light can be the current that pulls you to the bottom. I tried to get up to run, but when I took the first step away from that rock, the ground trembled and the music changed. The cheerful and false rhythm of Sweet Caroline disappeared and gave way to something more dragging, more somber, a feeling that I was trying to reach something I would never reach. I looked up and saw immense iron gates, covered in thorns, and I knew the next song was about to begin. I realized that each song there was a stage in a mental torture court, and I, who had spent my life making people dance, was now being forced to walk to the sound of my own condemnation. The fear was so intense that my soul felt like it was going to shatter, but I still had much to see and hear. I thought the worst was over with that macabre version of Sweet Caroline, but I was completely wrong. In hell, suffering isn't a straight line, it gets heavier, denser, as if the air were trying to crush you from the inside out. I started walking towards those immense iron gates I had seen from afar. The sound of Sweet Caroline faded, but what came in its place was 1,000 times more desperate. I heard a guitar, a sad, dragging strumming that seemed to carry the weight of an entire cemetery. The introduction to Knocking on Heaven's Door. Here in the world, we hear this song and find it profound, even somewhat relaxing, right? But there, my God, I saw hundreds of people with their hands raw and banging on those iron doors that had no handles. They were knocking so hard you could hear the sound of their finger bones cracking against the cold metal, and the music went, knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. They sang it crying, with voices devoid of hope. What I understood that gave me a knot in my stomach. Those people had spent their whole lives knocking on the door of spiritual things, but in the wrong way. They sought energies, they sought paths that seemed beautiful, but that didn't lead to God. They thought that at the moment of death heaven would open the door just because they were good or spiritual people, but the door was locked from the inside. The master of that place laughed at them because they had been knocking on the wrong door their whole lives. It was the sound of a lost opportunity. I tried to walk through that corridor of people, but the darkness things started to change. You know when you close your eyes and still see blurry shapes? The darkness there was different. It was solid. And that's when Painted started playing. At that moment I saw something terrible. You know the colors of life? The blue of the sky, the green of the trees, the brightness of the sun? I saw those colors being ripped from the souls that were there. The song was about wanting to paint everything black, and that's exactly what was happening. I saw people trying to remember the color of a child's face or the color of a flower, and that song seemed to erase their memories. Everything turned gray, then leaden, until it became an absolute black that felt like it would enter my eyes and blind my soul. It was a darkness whose weight you felt on your skin. It wasn't just a lack of light, it was the absence of God, because God is light, you understand? Without him there is no color, there is no beauty. I felt such a deep sadness that it felt like my chest was going to tear open. I was a DJ, I loved the colors of the neon lights, I loved the glow of the night. And seeing all of that devoured by that infinite blackness was like losing my identity. And in the middle of that darkness, a very dry and repetitive electronic beat began to rise. It was Personal Eyes. That song hit me hard. I saw people who seemed to be praying, but they weren't praying to the true God. They were praying to images, to idols, to themselves. The song spoke of a personal Jesus, someone you mold to your liking, who accepts your mistakes without asking for repentance, a God who fits in your pocket. I realized that many people are heading towards the abyss with the Bible under their arm, but following a God they themselves created. They created a Jesus who doesn't care about sin, a Jesus who is only love and zero justice. And there they realized that this invented one had no power to take anyone out of that place. The master of lies loved that song because it deceives many good people, making them believe they are saved while they live as they please. I was exhausted, my soul ached, I fell to my knees on the ash-covered ground, and at that moment the sound of a bass began to play. It was a melancholic melody, that of losing my religion. I saw people who had once been in church, people who knew the word of God, but who, because of a disappointment, an unconfessed sin, or pure pride, had decided to abandon their religion. They sang those lyrics as a cathartic outpouring from those who had given up. I heard their whispers. I tried, but it was too hard. God didn't hear me when I needed him. They threw away the only thing that could save their lives because they thought faith was a burden. Now, they're in the dark. They saw that the burden of being without God was billions of times heavier. The music hammered the guilt into their heads. You chose to leave. You chose to give up. I started screaming, "Stop, please. Stop that sound," but the music in hell doesn't stop. It's an eternal cycle of remembrance and pain. I felt that each of those songs was pulling me deeper, showing me that my life as a DJ wasn't all fun. I helped spread those messages. I helped create the atmosphere for people to feel comfortable in their distance from God. The pressure was becoming unbearable. I felt that the next stop would be the deepest point of all. The air got so hot that I felt my lips crack, and that's when I heard the first chord of a guitar I'd known since childhood, the song that everyone says is the most beautiful of all time. The song I thought was the anthem of peace. I looked ahead and saw a staircase. It shone with a false light, a light that didn't warm, and I knew, with a terror that paralyzed my lungs, that I was about to hear song number 7, the song that deceived the whole world and almost sealed my fate forever. I arrived at what seemed to be the center of that abyss. If the previous parts were bad, here the air was so heavy that I felt like I was breathing shards of glass, and it was there, right in front of me, that I saw the scene that had deceived me the most my entire life. Before me rose an immense staircase. It shone with a golden light, a beautiful thing to see, which seemed totally out of place in that garbage dump of souls, and the sound. The sound was that iconic finger-picking of Stairway to Heaven. Man, I loved that song. I thought it was the anthem of transcendence, something that spoke of a higher spiritual path, but when I looked closely at what was happening on that staircase, my blood ran cold. I saw thousands of people trying to climb those steps. They were desperate, stretching out their hands, thinking they would finally escape that suffering and reach the light. The music played softly, telling of a lady who believes that all that glitters is gold and that she is buying a stairway to heaven. But in hell, the truth appears naked and raw. As people climbed, the golden steps transformed. What seemed like gold was, in fact, incandescent metal. I saw the feet of those people frying, the smoke rising, but they were so blinded by the melody that they kept trying to climb, and worse, when they would reach a certain height, and the ladder would simply end in emptiness. There was no door, no sky, nothing. They would fall straight into a sea of fire and brimstone that lay below, screaming in despair that the music could no longer drown out. It was there that I understood the danger of that song. It preaches that you can buy or build your own path to heaven in your own way, with your own wisdom. It makes the path to God seem mystical and poetic, when in fact Jesus said that He is the only way. That song is one of the greatest traps the enemy has ever set on the radio. It gives false hope, a spirituality without repentance, without a cross, and without surrender. I saw people who had spent their lives being mystical and spiritual, but who had never known the Savior, falling from that ladder like flies. The phrase hammered in my mind as I watched those falls. Not every path that seems to lead upwards ends in the light. I cried seeing the deception of so many people who, like me, thought that lyric was profound. It was a depth that only led to the bottom of the pit. But the sound changed again. Stairway's guitar was replaced by a soft piano, a calm melody that the whole world knows as the anthem of world peace. It was Imagine. If you think this song is beautiful, you need to see how it feels in hell. The place where this music played was a grey valley, where there was no sound of crying, only a hollow silence, an emptiness that seemed to suck the very soul. The lyrics say, imagine there's no heaven, imagine there's no hell and no religion either. There I saw what happens when that wish comes true. I saw a huge group of people living as if God didn't exist, people who thought peace would come from a world without divine rules, without absolute truth. What I saw wasn't peace, it was absolute emptiness. Without God there is no love, without God there is no purpose. Those people wandered like empty shells, unable to feel anything, not even hatred. It was a colorless, tasteless existence, where they were forever trapped in the freedom they chose, the freedom to stay away from the Creator. John Lennon sang about a world with nothing to kill or die for. But what I saw was a world where there was nothing to live for. The Imagine Hell is a celebration of human autonomy gone wrong. It's the place of those who said, I don't need God, I am self-sufficient. The result is eternal loneliness in the midst of a crowd. I saw people trying to embrace each other, but their bodies passed right by because there was no connection, no breath of life that only God gives. I realized that I, as a DJ, played Imagine at peace and love parties. I helped spread the idea that paradise is here and that God is an unnecessary accessory. I felt a weight of guilt that felt like it would tear me in two. I was at the deepest point of my judgment. I saw the lie of the stairway to heaven and the horror of a world without God. I was lying on the ground, feeling that there was no way out for me. I was part of it. I promoted that system of thought with my art and my rebellious life. I wasn't just a spectator, I was one of the architects of that noise that led people to death. I wanted to disappear, I wanted my existence to end right there so I wouldn't have to feel that guilt anymore. But in hell, you don't cease to exist, you just continue to feel the weight of your choices forever. I looked at my hands and they were turning gray, like the hands of the people in the Valley of Imagine. The emptiness was beginning to devour me. I no longer had the strength to scream, I could only think of my mother's face and the God she spoke so much about. But would he hear me now, after I'd spent my whole life playing the enemy's music? I lay there on that ashen floor, feeling the emptiness of Imagine drying up my soul. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but hell always has a deeper layer of pain. The silence was broken by a piano sound, but it wasn't calm like the previous one, it was a frantic sound, full of tension. Bohemian Rhapsody began to play. In the world, we find this music brilliant, a work of art, but there it was the soundtrack to mental confusion. I saw people running around, covering their ears, while overlapping voices screamed inside their heads. The music speaks of Galileo, Bebop, and a young man confessing to his mother, "Mom, I just killed a man. Life has barely begun and now I've thrown it all away." Those words hit me like hammer blows. I never pulled a trigger against anyone, but there, in the spirit, I understood that I had quenched the thirst for God in many people. How many times have I seen young people at my parties in a trance, lost in drugs and casual sex, while I controlled the soundtrack. I threw my life away for the applause of people who didn't even know me. I heard the lament of that music and felt that every word was about me. I was the poor boy that nobody loved, but not because I was a victim, but because I chose to be an orphan of God. The music changed rhythm, becoming operatic, mocking. I saw the shadows laughing in the faces of those souls, repeating, "He won't let you go." The despair of knowing you made the wrong choices and that the time to fix them is over is the worst torture there is. It's not the physical fire that burns the most, it's the fire of guilt that won't go out. I remembered every time my mother tried to take me to church and I joked. I remembered every Bible I saw and ignored, and then the sound changed to a more desert-like guitar rhythm. Hotel California started playing. That song described exactly what I was going through. I saw a place that looked luxurious from the outside, like a big nightclub, but when people went in, the doors disappeared. They tried to leave, but the corridors were endless. The lyrics said, "You can check out whenever you want, but you can never leave." I understood that sin is exactly like that. It invites you in with lights, with a good smell, with promises of pleasure. It makes you feel special, as if you were in a five-star hotel, but after you enter and surrender, you realize it's a prison. I saw celebrities there. I saw people I idolized on earth, trapped in dark rooms, repeating the same vices that killed them, never able to find satisfaction. It was a cycle of eternal hunger. They had steel knives, but they couldn't kill the beast. The beast was their own desire, which now devoured them. It was at that moment that my spiritual heart broke. I wasn't just afraid of suffering, I was disgusted with who I had become. I looked at my history and saw a succession of moments of arrogance. I thought I was so intelligent, so progressive, but I was just a prisoner in